The playground was full of laughter until one sound erased it completely. A gunshot. Children froze mid-step. Parents screamed. Teachers threw themselves over kids without even thinking. And standing near the fence was a woman no one expected to be armed, an HOA enforcer known for complaints, fines, and control. She wasn't protecting anyone. She wasn't in danger. She was angry. In broad daylight, next to a school playground, she raised a gun and fired. Phones dropped. Time stopped. In just seconds, a neighborhood dispute turned into a criminal nightmare. A woman who once threatened people over trash cans had now crossed a line she could never come back from. Police sirens were already closing in, and her life was about to change forever. This isn't a rumor. This isn't exaggeration. This actually happened. Before we go deeper into this story, I want to ask you something. Which city are you watching this video from right now? Take 1 second and drop your city name in the comments below. I read them all, and I love seeing where everyone is watching from. Now, if you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We share real-life stories that expose power abuse, shocking behavior, and moments that change lives forever, stories you won't hear on the evening news. Because today's story isn't just about a woman or a gun. It's about what happens when authority goes unchecked, when someone believes rules make them untouchable, when ego replaces common sense. This took place in what looked like the safest environment imaginable, a quiet suburban neighborhood, a school playground, and families who thought nothing bad could ever happen there. But danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks like a clipboard. Sometimes it looks like a rule book. And sometimes it looks like someone who believes they are always right. What you're about to hear made parents question their safety, forced an entire community to speak out, and ended one woman's sense of control in a matter of minutes. As this story unfolds, you'll see how small conflicts can explode into irreversible consequences, and how one reckless decision can erase years of privilege and reputation. So take a breath. Stay with me, because what happened next left an entire playground in shock, and a neighborhood forever changed. In every neighborhood, there's always someone people quietly warn you about. Not openly, not loudly, just a look, a pause, and a sentence like, "Be careful around her." In this neighborhood, everyone knew exactly who that warning was about. She had lived there for years, long enough to memorize every rule, every fine, every loophole in the HOA handbook, long enough to believe that the paper authority she held made her superior to everyone else. She wasn't elected because people liked her. She was tolerated because people didn't want trouble. She volunteered for the HOA board when no one else would. Then, slowly, she turned that position into power. Real power, at least in her mind. At first, it seemed harmless. A note left on a windshield about parking. A warning letter slipped under a door about lawn height. A polite email reminding parents that children should be supervised at all times. But over time, the tone changed. Warnings became threats. Reminders became demands. And neighbors began to realize something unsettling. She didn't just want compliance. She wanted control. Parents noticed it first. She had an obsession with children, not in a caring way, but in a disciplinary way. Kids playing too loudly. Kids riding bikes in groups. Kids laughing past sunset. She called it maintaining order. Others called it harassment. Neighbors started adjusting their routines just to avoid her. Trash cans were hidden early. Music was turned down. People waited inside until her car passed before letting their kids play outside. Even then, it was never enough. She carried herself like law enforcement. Chin high, eyes scanning, voice sharp and absolute. When she spoke, it wasn't a conversation, it was a command. "I'm with the HOA." As if that sentence alone ended all debate. But the most unsettling part? She genuinely believed she was protecting the neighborhood. In her mind, everyone else was the problem. Disrespectful parents, undisciplined kids, a community that didn't understand order. And that belief grew stronger every time someone backed down. No one challenged her. No one pushed back hard enough. Until the day she crossed a boundary no rulebook could protect her from. It started with the school. The elementary school sat just beyond the edge of the HOA-controlled area. Technically public property. Technically none of her business. But she didn't see it that way. She complained about the noise. She complained about traffic. She complained about parents parking incorrectly, even though they weren't breaking any laws. She sent emails to the school administration. She filed reports with the HOA. She even contacted the city repeatedly. Nothing came of it. And that's when the resentment started to boil. Neighbors noticed her watching the playground more often, sitting in her car, taking notes, making phone calls. Some thought she was just being dramatic. Others felt something darker brewing. She began telling people that the playground was out of control, that kids were a danger, that parents were irresponsible. And then she started saying something that sent chills through anyone who heard it. If no one steps in soon, something bad is going to happen. At the time, it sounded like a complaint. Looking back, it sounded like a warning. She felt ignored, dismissed, powerless. And for someone like her, that was unacceptable. She didn't see herself as an HOA volunteer anymore. She saw herself as the last line of defense, the one willing to do what others wouldn't. The day everything changed began like any other. Clear skies, normal traffic, a regular school, afternoon. Kids laughed as they ran toward the playground, backpacks tossed aside, joy echoing through the air. Parents chatted nearby. Teachers monitored recess. Life moved forward peacefully, unaware of the storm approaching. And then her car pulled up. Slowly, deliberately. She sat there for a moment watching, listening. And somewhere in her mind, something snapped. What happened next would turn her from an HOA nuisance into a criminal suspect, and turn an ordinary playground into the scene of a nightmare. And no one was prepared for how far she was about to go. The playground had a rhythm to it. The clatter of chains on the swings, the thump of sneakers on rubber mats, children shouting rules to games only they understood. It was the kind of noise adults usually tuned out, the sound of life continuing as it should. But to her it was chaos. From inside her parked car, she watched the playground like a surveillance post, windows cracked, engine idling, eyes locked on movement instead of faces. She didn't see kids playing. She saw violations. Too many children in one area, parents standing too far apart, teachers not paying enough attention. In her mind, this wasn't a school playground. It was a problem no one else was willing to solve. She checked her phone again. No response from the city. No reply from the school administration. Silence felt like disrespect. Her grip tightened around the steering wheel. That was when she opened the door. The moment her feet hit the pavement, parents recognized her immediately. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. There was a collective tension, the kind that forms when people know trouble has arrived. She walked toward the fence with purpose. Fast, rigid, angry. "Who's in charge here?" she shouted, her voice slicing through the noise. A teacher stepped forward, calm but alert. She explained that recess was underway, that everything was under control. That wasn't the answer she wanted. She began listing complaints like charges in a courtroom. Noise, parking, unsafe behavior. Each sentence louder than the last. Parents moved closer to the playground instinctively. A few pulled out their phones. One father tried to reason with her. He told her this wasn't HOA property, that these were kids, that she needed to lower her voice. She pointed a finger inches from his face. "You people never listen," she snapped. "That's why things get out of hand." The teacher asked her to step back behind the fence. School policy, safety rules. That word, rules, set her off. "I know the rules," she said, "better than all of you." She accused the school of negligence, claimed children were running into traffic, said she had reported this dozens of times. None of it was true, but she believed it. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with rage. Kids began to notice. Laughter faded. Swings slowed. Some children froze, unsure if they were in trouble. A mother whispered for her child to come closer. The tension thickened. Then she said it. If no one here is going to take responsibility, she said loudly, I will. The teacher's tone changed immediately. Firm. Protective. She told her she needed to leave. Now, that's when the crowd saw her reach into her bag. Not hurried. Not panicked. Deliberate. A woman gasped. Someone shouted, Hey! A metallic glint flashed in the sunlight. For a split second, nobody processed what they were seeing. Then reality hit. She pulled out a handgun. Parents screamed. Teachers moved without thinking. Children were grabbed, pushed, shielded. Put it away, someone yelled. Her breathing was heavy, fast, unstable. She wasn't aiming at anyone, not yet. But the message was clear. I'm being threatened, she shouted, voice cracking. I have the right to protect myself. Nothing about this was self-defense. She stepped closer to the fence. A teacher lunged forward, arms raised, pleading with her to stop. And that's when she raised the gun toward the sky. The sound that followed was deafening. A single gunshot ripped through the playground. Birds scattered. Children screamed. Time shattered. Kids dropped to the ground crying. Teachers covered them with their bodies. Parents tackled her from behind, forcing her to the pavement. The gun skidded across the concrete. She screamed hysterically, not in regret, but in shock that she had lost control. This is your fault, she yelled. You pushed me to this. Someone was already on the phone with 911. The playground was silent except for sobbing. No one had been hit, but no one would ever forget the sound. Sirens grew louder in the distance, and as she lay restrained on the ground, staring at the sky, the weight of what she'd done began to sink in. Because the rules she once hid behind were about to be replaced by something far more real. The law was coming, and there was no HOA handbook that could save her now. For a few seconds after the gunshot, the world didn't move. It felt unreal, like the sound hadn't fully landed yet. Then everything happened at once. Children cried uncontrollably, their small bodies shaking as they clung to teachers and parents. Some were screaming for their moms. Others were silent, frozen in fear, eyes wide and unblinking. Teachers shouted instructions they never thought they'd have to give. Everyone down. Stay with me. Cover your heads. Parents formed human shields without thinking. Knees scraped against pavement. Arms wrapped tightly around trembling kids. One father pressed his child's face into his chest so she wouldn't see the woman pinned to the ground. Because she was still screaming, her voice cracked through the chaos. You can't do this to me. I'm the one being threatened. I was protecting myself. Two parents held her arms behind her back, their hands shaking, not from weakness, but from adrenaline. No one trusted her. Not after what she'd done. The gun lay several feet away, untouched, like a line no one wanted to cross. Someone yelled that police were coming, and suddenly she went quiet. The anger drained from her face, replaced by something far more fragile. Fear. Sirens grew louder with every passing second. Not one, not two, several. Fast, aggressive, unmistakable. She started to cry. Not for the kids, not for the teachers, for herself. I didn't mean it, she whispered over and over. I didn't mean it. But meaning didn't matter anymore. The first patrol car screeched to a stop at the edge of the playground. Doors flew open. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands with trained precision. Hands where we can see them. Step away from the suspect. Do not move. Parents immediately backed away, hands raised. Teachers stayed low, shielding children. One officer kicked the handgun away and secured it. Another cuffed her wrists behind her back. She didn't resist. She couldn't. As cold metal snapped around her wrists, something inside her finally broke. The woman who once issued fines with smug confidence now sobbed uncontrollably, mascara streaking down her face, body trembling. This is a misunderstanding, she told the officer. They wouldn't listen. I had no choice. The officer didn't respond. Body cameras recorded everything. Witnesses stepped forward one by one. Parents, teachers, even a teenager walking home who had captured part of it on video. Every story matched, every detail aligned. She had come angry. She had escalated. She had fired the gun. There was no confusion. The playground was taped off. Children were escorted inside. Parents were interviewed. Some shook with anger, others with shock. One mother couldn't stop repeating the same sentence. "This is where my kid plays." The officers placed her in the back of the patrol car. The door slammed shut with finality. And for the first time in years, she had no authority, no clipboard, no rule book, no one to intimidate, just consequences. As the car pulled away, neighbors stood watching, some from behind fences, others from porches. The same woman who once scared them into silence was now leaving in handcuffs. But the damage didn't leave with her. That night, kids had nightmares. Parents couldn't sleep. Teachers replayed the moment again and again. One sound, one choice, one bullet fired into the air, but lodged permanently into the memory of an entire community. News vans arrived before sunset. Headlines spread fast. Social media exploded with outrage. People asked the same question again and again. How did it get this far? And the answer was uncomfortable, because it didn't happen in one moment. It happened slowly, through unchecked behavior, ignored warnings, excuses made to avoid conflict, until the day avoidance wasn't possible anymore. In a holding cell that night, she sat alone, staring at the floor. No one was listening to her now. No one cared about her explanations, and for the first time, she was forced to confront the truth she had spent years avoiding. She was never in control. She was just someone who believed she was, and that belief had just cost her everything. What happened next would shake the entire neighborhood and expose how many people had stayed silent for far too long. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Local news headlines blared phrases like "gun fired near school playground" and "HOA board member arrested." Helicopter footage showed the taped-off playground, blurred images of crying parents, police statements delivered with tight, serious expressions. But inside the police station, the tone was very different. There were no cameras, no excuses, no power. She sat in a small interrogation room, wrists cuffed to a metal ring bolted into the table. The same hands that once signed violation notices were now trembling uncontrollably. Across from her sat two detectives, calm, silent, patient. They let the quiet stretch. She broke first. She launched into a rehearsed explanation. How she felt threatened, how people were aggressive, how no one respected her authority. She framed herself as a victim of chaos, a responsible adult forced into an impossible situation. The detectives listened without interrupting. Then, one of them slid a tablet across the table. Bodycam footage, witness videos, multiple angles. They pressed play. Her voice echoed back at her, loud, hostile, escalating. Her finger pointing inches from a parent's face. Her hand reaching into the bag, the gun appearing. Her breath caught. She tried to look away. The detective stopped the video at the exact moment the gun discharged. "This," he said calmly, "is where your story ends." Her justification collapsed in seconds. There was no immediate threat, no physical attack, no legal reason to draw a weapon, let alone fire it. The charges were read to her slowly, clearly, and without emotion. Felony reckless endangerment, discharging a firearm in a school zone, child endangerment, criminal threats. Each charge landed heavier than the last. She asked if the HOA would help her. The detective didn't answer, because the HOA already had. Within hours of her arrest, an emergency HOA meeting was called. Board members scrambled to distance themselves. Statements were released condemning her actions. They removed her from her position unanimously. No debate, no defense. Years of unchecked behavior erased with a single vote. Her attorney arrived later that afternoon. The look on his face said everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a gray area. This was serious. He explained the reality in plain terms. Prison time was possible. Probation at minimum. Permanent criminal record guaranteed. She stared at him in disbelief. "I was just trying to keep order," she whispered. But the law didn't care about intentions, only actions. Meanwhile, The community was unraveling. Parents demanded answers. How had someone like this been allowed near a school for so long? Why were earlier complaints ignored? Why did no one intervene sooner? Teachers submitted incident reports detailing previous encounters with her. Emails surfaced, phone logs, documentation of escalating behavior. Suddenly, the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a single bad day. It was a slow burn, ignored until exploded. The school district issued a permanent trespass order. She was legally banned from school property for life. The city opened a review into HOA oversight, and neighbors began speaking publicly, people who had stayed silent for years out of fear or exhaustion. She scared us, one resident admitted on camera. She acted like she owned us, said another. We just didn't want trouble, a parent confessed. That silence weighed heavily now. Back in her cell that night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. No phone, no control, no one to intimidate, just time. Time to replay every moment, every warning ignored, every line crossed. For the first time, she wasn't issuing consequences, she was facing them. And the worst part? She finally understood something she never had before. The power she thought she had was never real. It only existed because people were afraid to challenge her. And now, there was nothing left to hide behind. The investigation wasn't over. More truths were coming out, and the final impact of her actions would ripple far beyond a single playground, exposing a system that failed by staying quiet for too long. The gunshot didn't just echo across the playground. It echoed through the entire neighborhood. In the days that followed, everything felt different. The swing stood still. The laughter that once filled the air was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that lingered even when the playground reopened. Parents hesitated before letting their kids play outside. Teachers flinched at loud noises. Children asked questions no adult ever wants to hear. Why did that lady have a gun? Is she coming back? Are we safe now? There were no easy answers. School counselors were brought in. Classrooms turned into spaces for quiet conversations and reassurance. Some kids refused to go to recess. Others clung to their parents at drop-off, afraid to let go. What had happened wasn't just frightening. It was violating. This was supposed to be a safe place, a school, a playground, a community built on trust. And that trust had been shattered by someone who was never meant to have that level of influence in the first place. As the shock wore off, something else began to surface. Anger. Parents started talking, really talking, for the first time. Stories poured out. Encounters that once felt isolated suddenly formed a clear pattern. She had screamed at people in their own driveways. She had followed residents home to take photos. She had threatened fines that didn't exist. She had intimidated parents in front of their children. And everyone had done the same thing. Stayed quiet, not because they agreed with her, but because it felt easier than fighting back. That realization hurt. Community meetings were packed. People who had never spoken publicly stood up and shared their experiences. Voices shook. Some cried. Others spoke with rage they had been holding in for years. How did we let this happen? Someone asked. The answer was uncomfortable, because silence is powerful too. Local officials attended the meetings. HOA oversight policies were questioned. New rules were proposed. Transparency became the word everyone kept repeating. Never again, they promised. But promises didn't erase trauma. A memorial-style gathering was held at the playground, not for loss of life, but for loss of innocence. Parents stood with their kids, holding hands, reminding themselves that fear didn't get to win. Candles flickered in the evening light. Someone placed a sign near the fence. This is a place for children, not control. The media eventually moved on, as it always does. New stories replaced old ones. But for the people who live there, this wasn't yesterday's news. It was permanent. Every siren still caused hearts to race. Every unfamiliar car slowed. Nearby drew suspicious glances. Safety was no longer assumed. It had to be rebuilt. And somewhere behind bars, she heard none of it. She didn't see the meetings. She didn't hear the kids' questions. She didn't feel the collective weight of what she had done. But she felt something else. Isolation. Her phone stopped ringing. The HOA she once dominated erased her name from their website. Former allies distanced themselves publicly, afraid of being associated with her. She became a cautionary tale, not a leader, not an enforcer, a warning. Her attorney advised her not to watch the news. But she did anyway, sitting alone, watching strangers talk about her like she wasn't a real person. She thought she was above the law. She endangered children. She abused power. Each sentence chipped away at the version of herself she had clung to for years. She had believed she was necessary. Now she was infamous. Meanwhile, parents began teaching their kids something new, not just stranger danger, but something more complex. That authority doesn't always mean safety. That adults can make bad choices too. That speaking up matters. The community wasn't the same anymore. But maybe it was becoming stronger. Because what grew out of fear wasn't just anger. It was awareness. And awareness has a way of changing things, if people are brave enough to listen. The final chapter of this story wasn't just about punishment. It was about accountability, and that chapter was still being written. Time passed, but the memory didn't fade. Weeks turned into months, and the playground slowly filled with sound again. Kids laughed. Swings creaked. Life returned, but not the way it was before. Something fundamental had changed. Parents watched more closely now. Teachers were more alert. Conversations that once felt awkward or unnecessary became normal. People spoke up. The woman at the center of it all became less visible as the legal process dragged on. Court dates, motions, delays. But the outcome was inevitable. The evidence was overwhelming. She pleaded not guilty at first, clinging to the last piece of control she had left. But reality doesn't bend to ego. Eventually, she accepted a plea deal. Felony charges stuck. Firearm ownership revoked permanently. Probation mandated counseling, and a criminal record that would follow her for life. No more authority, no more power, just consequences. The judge didn't raise his voice during sentencing. He didn't need to. His words were measured, calm, and devastating. This court is not concerned with your intentions, he said. It is concerned with your actions and the fear you caused. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, eyes hollow. For the first time, there was no argument left to make. Outside the courtroom, parents stood quietly. Some held hands. Others simply breathed, relieved that the chapter was finally closing. But relief didn't mean victory. Because the real lesson of this story wasn't about one woman. It was about how easily unchecked authority can grow dangerous. How small abuses of power, ignored, tolerated, excused, can evolve into something unthinkable. No one wakes up one day and fires a gun at a playground. That moment is built, brick by brick, warning by warning, silence by silence. This community learned that lesson the hardest way possible. They learned that avoiding conflict isn't the same as keeping peace, that rules don't equal morality, that speaking up early can prevent tragedy later. And they learned something else too. That safety isn't automatic. It's maintained by people willing to question authority, challenge behavior, and protect the vulnerable, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. The playground sign still hangs on the fence. This is a place for children. Simple, obvious, and now deeply meaningful. Parents still tell the story not to scare their kids, but to teach them. About responsibility. About accountability. About how power should never exist without oversight. And about how quickly things can go wrong when it does. Somewhere else, in another neighborhood, another HOA board is meeting right now. Another person is enforcing rules. Another community is deciding whether to speak up or stay quiet. This story isn't rare. It's a warning. Because when people confuse authority with control and control with righteousness, the consequences can be devastating. And sometimes it only takes one moment to expose it all. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. That means it mattered. If you believe power should always be questioned, hit the like button so more people hear this. If you want more real stories that expose abuse, entitlement, and accountability, subscribe to this channel right now. And Tell me in the comments, backhand index pointing down, have you ever seen authority go too far? Because silence protects the wrong people. And stories like this remind us why speaking up matters.